Have you ever wondered what the United States might look like if it was ruled by a powerful and mysterious warrior class? No, not the Illuminati. Something more exotic, perhaps even more deadly, the samurai. In our timeline, the samurai were a warrior class in ancient Japan who lived between the 12th and 19th centuries. But let's turn back time and explore an alternate history where Oda Nobunaga's forces successfully invaded the Americas. Welcome to my channel. Today we explore an alternate history where the samurai took over America. It's the year 1565 and Oda Nobunaga's forces have just crushed the army of the rival Takeda clan, leaving him with control of most of central Japan. However, Nobunaga isn't satisfied with just ruling Japan. He believes that his destiny is to conquer all of Asia and even the lands across the Great Ocean. To this end, he has spent years studying the recently published accounts of Portuguese explorer Francis Xavier, who claimed to have found vast riches and even the legendary Kipangu in the eastern seas. When news arrives of the decimation of the Spanish Armada and the weakening of the Portuguese by the English, Nobunaga sees his chance to strike. He begins outfitting a fleet of large transport ships and war junks, planning to sail west and claim the riches of the rumored Cathay for Japan. In 1571, with a force of around 3,000 men and many more supplies, Nobunaga set sail west. As the ships approached the coast of California, his fleet was spotted by a small group of Spanish soldiers who fled to the nearest settlement. Hearing of the massive Japanese fleet approaching, the Spanish governor Don Pedro de Hinojos gathered his forces in San Diego, where the Japanese landed. Seeing the fortified city, Nobunaga decided to lay siege, believing the riches of Cathay to be within reach. After weeks of fighting, Nobunaga ordered his engineers to build huge catapults to assault the city walls. While the Japanese were preparing their attack, a large group of local warriors arrived, led by a fierce female chieftain named Takama. She watched as her people were slaughtered by the Japanese and swore revenge. As night fell, Nobunaga stood alone on the beach watching the flickering lights of the city. Suddenly he heard a war cry and turned to see Takama and her warriors charging at him. Although outnumbered, Nobunaga fought bravely but was soon surrounded. As the chief was about to deliver the killing blow, a low rumble echoed from the sea. Startled, they turned to see Nobunaga's fleet opening fire on the shore with its cannons. With the help of his ships, Nobunaga and his army were able to defeat the natives and capture San Diego. The city's defenders retreated into the mountains, regrouping under Takama's leadership. Nobunaga followed, eager to finish the battle. As his forces advanced, the Japanese began finding abandoned villages and unharvested crops. Realizing the potential of this new land, Nobunaga ordered his men to establish settlements and farms. Meanwhile, Takama led her warriors in guerrilla attacks against the Japanese, picking up steam when she was joined by other tribes who resented the Japanese occupation. However, Nobunaga proved to be a brilliant tactician and slowly defeated the various tribes, forcing them to flee into the mountains. Finally, only Tachi and a handful of followers remained, holding out in a remote village in the Sierras. When Nobunaga arrived, he offered Tachi a noble title and land if she surrendered, but she refused. In the ensuing battle, Tachi fought fiercely but was eventually killed, ending the last vestige of native resistance. With peace restored, Nobunaga divided his empire into 3 sections, each ruled by one of his 3 sons. Japan itself would be ruled by his eldest, while his second son would govern the Philippines, recently conquered from the Spanish. The youngest, however, would rule the Western territories, including California, Oregon, and Washington. Decades passed, and Nobunaga's empire flourished. His descendants would rule the United States for centuries, ushering in a golden age for the country. Oda Nobuyoshi, the second ruler of the empire, would expand American borders northward, conquering all of Canada and even Alaska. To the south, Mexico and Central America would also be conquered. By the year 1800, the Oda Shogunate controlled all of the Americas, from the frozen wastes of the north to the tropical jungles of Central America. During this time, the samurai flourished, becoming the most powerful class in society. Through intermarriage with European nobility, they maintained a rigid caste system, with the Japanese emperor at the top and indigenous peoples at the bottom. Large cities were built, modeled after Edo, and trade flourished throughout the empire. But the prosperity would not last forever. By the mid-19th century, the shogunate was showing signs of weakness. The vast empire was difficult to govern, and the shoguns were far from the military geniuses of their ancestors. Meanwhile, the lower classes chafed under the strictures of the caste system. Then came the catalyst for change, Commodore Perry's arrival in 1853. Unlike in our timeline, where this forced the Tokugawa shogunate to open Japan to the west, in this alternate history, the American shogunate saw Perry as a threat to their rule. An army was quickly assembled and sent to deal with the foreigners. When Perry anchored in Edo Bay, he expected little resistance from the Japanese. He had come to demand that Japan open its ports to trade, but when he landed and met with the local lord, he was informed that the Emperor of Japan was the supreme ruler of all of America, and that no foreigners were allowed in his domains. Perry was outraged, but knew that he could not fight the Japanese navy. He demanded that the emperor reconsider, but was refused. So he set sail for home, vowing to return with a fleet capable of defeating the Japanese navy. When Perry returned with a squadron of US Navy ships, he was again rebuffed by the Americans. Realizing that diplomacy was futile, Perry opened fire. The resulting battle was one of the largest and most destructive naval engagements in history. Although the Americans were ultimately victorious, it came at a terrible cost. Many ships were sunk and thousands of sailors were dead. Perry, mortally wounded, managed to escape and make it back to the United States. But the victory was short-lived. As the US Navy prepared for the next battle, word arrived that the rest of the American fleet had been wiped out by a typhoon. Without the Navy, the West Coast was vulnerable and soon fell to the Japanese. Perry realized that he had made a grave error. He should have never provoked the Americans, but it was too late. The Japanese had proven to be a formidable enemy, and the United States was on the verge of collapse. Perry knew that he could not win a war against the Americans, but he refused to surrender. Instead, he fled to Hawaii and formed a resistance movement. Meanwhile, the Japanese occupied the West Coast and began enslaving the native population. They also closed off all trade with the outside world, plunging America into darkness once again. For decades, Perry and his followers harassed the Japanese, but it was not until the arrival of the Russians that things began to turn. The Russians, who had long coveted the riches of the Pacific Northwest, joined forces with the Americans and launched a massive attack on the Japanese. The Japanese were unable to withstand this two-pronged assault and soon began retreating northward. They hoped to make a stand in Japan proper, but it was too late. The war with the West had drained their resources and manpower, and they were forced to sign a treaty giving up all of their American possessions. With the Japanese gone, the United States was free. But the country was in ruins. Much of the West Coast had been destroyed during the war, and the economy was in sharp decline. But the Americans were resilient and soon began rebuilding their lives. In the years since then, the United States has become a major world power. And although there is still tension with Japan, the two countries are now allies. Today, the world is a very different place than it would be if the Japanese had taken over America. The United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world, and its influence is felt in every corner of the globe. If the Japanese had been successful in their invasion, it is likely that the course of history would have been very different. Perhaps the United States would not exist at all, or perhaps it would be a vastly different country. One thing is for sure, the world would certainly be a different place. Thank you for watching.